Marcus Blackwood stood on the wraparound porch of his mansion, surveying the vast expanse of his agricultural empire with the cold satisfaction of a man who had crushed everything in his path to get where he was. At 45, he owned over 50,000 acres of prime farmland in rural Nebraska, controlled three major grain processing facilities, and had a net worth that exceeded most small countries' GDP. But wealth hadn't softened Marcus. It had hardened him into something barely recognizable as human. The Blackwood Agricultural Corporation wasn't just a business. It was a weapon wielded against anyone who dared to stand in Marcus's way. Over the past decade, he had systematically bought out, bankrupted, or simply bullied dozens of small family farms, absorbing their land into his ever-growing empire. He viewed independent farmers not as fellow agriculturalists, but as obstacles to be removed, weeds to be pulled from his perfect corporate garden. His latest target was particularly satisfying: the Peterson family farm, a modest 200-acre operation that had been in the same family for 4 generations. The farm sat right in the middle of Marcus's northern expansion plans, a small island of independence in his sea of corporate control. For 3 years, he had been pressuring the Petersons to sell, using every legal and barely legal tactic at his disposal. The current owner was 80-year-old Henry Peterson, a widowed grandfather whose hands were gnarled from decades of honest work, but whose spirit remained unbroken despite Marcus's relentless campaign against him. Henry's wife Margaret had passed away 2 years earlier, and his only son had died in a farming accident 5 years ago, leaving Henry to care for the land alone with the help of his teenage granddaughter Sarah. Marcus had tried everything to force Henry off his land. He'd bought up all the surrounding properties, cutting off Henry's access to shared equipment and cooperative buying programs. He'd lobbied the county to change zoning laws, pressured banks to call in loans, and even had his lawyers find obscure violations to report to regulatory agencies. But Henry Peterson was as stubborn as the century-old oak tree that stood in his front yard, and he refused to sell. "That old fool is costing me millions," Marcus had complained to his attorney, Jonathan Steele, during their weekly strategy meeting. "Every day that farm remains independent, it's a symbol that I can be beaten. I won't have it." "Marcus, we've tried everything legal," Steele had warned. "If we push any harder, we risk drawing unwanted attention from the state attorney general's office." But Marcus Blackwood hadn't built his empire by backing down from challenges. He had something else in mind, something that would solve his Henry Peterson problem once and for all. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity and cruelty. Marcus owned a prize bull named Destroyer, a 2,200-pound Brahma cross that he'd originally acquired for breeding purposes, but had proven too aggressive for normal farm operations. Destroyer had injured 3 ranch hands and killed 2 other bulls in territorial disputes. Most farmers would have put down such a dangerous animal, but Marcus saw opportunity where others saw liability. Henry Peterson's farm bordered Marcus's property along a stretch of old wooden fencing that had been damaged in a recent storm. Marcus had accidentally delayed repairs to his side of the fence, creating weak points that could easily be breached. His plan was to drive Destroyer toward Henry's property during one of the old man's daily walks and let nature take its course. Everyone would assume it was a tragic accident, a case of an aggressive bull breaking through damaged fencing. "It's perfect," Marcus had told himself as he finalized the details. "One old man's unfortunate accident, and I'll be able to buy that land from his grieving granddaughter for a fraction of its value." What Marcus didn't know was that Henry Peterson had a history that went far beyond farming. Before inheriting the family land, Henry had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a medic, earning a Bronze Star for valor and a Purple Heart for injuries sustained while saving his fellow soldiers. He had seen the worst of humanity and the best, and he had an almost supernatural ability to read the character of both men and animals. Marcus also didn't know about the bond Henry had formed with animals throughout his life. Despite his advancing age and the arthritis that made every movement painful, Henry still cared for rescued animals on his property: old horses that would have been put down, injured birds that he nursed back to health, and stray dogs that somehow found their way to his welcoming farm. As Marcus stood on his porch that crisp October morning, watching his workers prepare Destroyer for what he believed would be his final solution to the Peterson problem, he felt no remorse, no second thoughts about what he was planning. In his mind, Henry Peterson was just another business obstacle to be eliminated, and if that elimination involved a deadly accident, so be it. But the universe has a way of revealing character when people think no one is watching, and sometimes the very instruments we choose for evil have other plans entirely. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed to have lost all sense of human decency in their pursuit of power and wealth? What do you think drives people like Marcus to such extremes? Share your thoughts in the comments. The morning mist clung to the Nebraska farmland like a shroud as Marcus Blackwood put his plan into motion. He had chosen this particular Tuesday because he knew Henry Peterson's routine better than the old man knew it himself. Every Tuesday at 9 a.m., Henry walked the perimeter of his property, checking fences, observing his crops, and simply enjoying the land that his family had worked for over a century. Marcus had positioned himself and three of his most trusted and most morally flexible employees along the fence line that separated his property from Henry's. Jake Morrison, his head of security, was a former prison guard who had been fired for excessive force. Tommy Reeves and Bill Santos were ranch hands who had learned not to ask questions about their boss's more questionable activities. Remember, Marcus instructed his men, this has to look completely accidental. We're just moving livestock, and unfortunately, our damaged fence gives way at the worst possible moment. Destroyer stood in a reinforced pen about a quarter mile from the fence line, pawing the ground and snorting with barely contained aggression. The massive bull was a terrifying sight. His black coat gleamed with muscle, his eyes held a red-tinged fury, and his horns curved into lethal points that had already drawn blood from anyone foolish enough to get too close. "Boss," Jake Morrison said nervously, "are you sure about this? If that bull actually hurts the old man, we could all be looking at manslaughter charges." Marcus turned to face Morrison with the cold stare that had intimidated hundreds of business rivals. "The only thing you need to worry about, Jake, is following my orders. Everything else is above your pay grade." At exactly 8:45 a.m., Henry Peterson emerged from his modest farmhouse, just as he had every Tuesday for the past 15 years. Even at 80, he moved with the purposeful stride of a man who had never learned to be idle. His walking stick, carved from oak wood by his late son, helped support his arthritic joints, but his back remained straight and his eyes sharp. Henry wore his usual Tuesday outfit, well-worn jeans, a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and a baseball cap advertising a seed company that had gone out of business 10 years earlier. To Marcus, watching through binoculars from his concealed position, Henry looked like exactly what he was, a helpless old man whose time had come. "Target is moving toward the northwest corner," Marcus radioed to his men. "Initiate phase 1. The plan was precisely timed. As Henry approached the damaged section of fence, Marcus's team would release Destroyer and drive him toward the boundary. The bull's natural aggression, combined with the strategic weakening of the fence posts, would create a scenario where Henry Peterson would find himself trapped in an open field with 2,200 pounds of enraged beef bearing down on him. If this intense story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to see how this incredible confrontation unfolds. Comment below. What do you think the bull will do when it reaches Henry? Will Marcus's evil plans succeed or backfire? Henry paused at the oak tree in his front yard, the same tree where he had proposed to Margaret 55 years earlier. He touched the bark gently, a daily ritual that connected him to memories of happier times. From his vantage point, Marcus felt a momentary flicker of something that might have been conscience, but he quickly suppressed it. "Business is business," he muttered to himself, raising the radio to his lips. "Phase 1, go." Jake Morrison and his team began moving Destroyer toward the fence line, using cattle prods and loud noises to agitate the already hostile animal. The bull's bellowing could be heard across both properties as his fury mounted with each step toward the boundary. Henry heard the commotion immediately. His 60 years of farming experience had taught him to recognize the sounds of livestock in distress, and something about this particular situation set off alarm bells in his mind. The timing was too convenient, the noise too deliberately directed toward his property. Instead of continuing his planned route along the fence line, Henry made a decision that would save his life and reveal Marcus Blackwood's true character to the world. He pulled out his cell phone, a gift from his granddaughter that he rarely used, and began recording a video. "It's Tuesday, October 15th, 9 a.m., Henry spoke clearly into the phone's camera. "I'm hearing unusual livestock noise from the Blackwood property, and given the pattern of harassment I've been experiencing, I'm documenting this for my own protection." Marcus, watching through his binoculars, saw Henry raise the phone and felt his blood pressure spike. This wasn't part of the plan. The old man was supposed to be walking innocently along the fence line, not standing in his yard making what appeared to be some kind of recording. "Abort!" Marcus barked into his radio. "I said abort! Pull back!" But it was too late. Destroyer had reached the fence line, and his massive weight easily splintered the deliberately weakened posts. The bull burst through onto Peterson property like a black tornado of muscle and rage, immediately spotting Henry standing 60 yards away near the oak tree. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, man and beast stared at each other across the morning mist. Henry Peterson, 80 years old and armed with nothing but a walking stick, faced down the most dangerous animal in 3 counties while his phone continued recording everything. Marcus Blackwood, watching his plan spiral out of control, felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine fear. Not fear for Henry Peterson's safety, but fear of the consequences if this accident was now clearly documented as something else entirely. Do you think Henry suspected this was a deliberate attack, or was he just being cautious after years of harassment? Have you ever had to face down a dangerous situation while keeping your wits about you? Tell us in the comments how you think you would react in Henry's position. Destroyer charged across Henry Peterson's property with the unstoppable force of a freight train, his hooves thundering against the earth and his massive head lowered for impact. Every instinct Marcus Blackwood possessed told him that he was about to witness a murder, and that he would be responsible for it. But Henry Peterson didn't run. The old man stood his ground beside the oak tree, his phone still recording, and did something that defied all logic and expectation. He began talking to the charging bull in a calm, steady voice that somehow carried across the 50 yards between them. "Easy there, big fellow," Henry called out, his tone as gentle as if he were addressing a frightened puppy rather than a ton of enraged beef. "I know you're scared and confused. This isn't your fault." Marcus, watching through his binoculars with growing horror, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The old man had lost his mind. There was no other explanation for why anyone would try to talk to a charging bull instead of running for their life. Destroyer was now 30 yards away and closing fast when something extraordinary began to happen. The bull's ears, which had been pinned back against his head in pure aggression, started to twitch forward. His pace didn't slow, but his head began to rise slightly, as if he was actually listening to Henry's voice. "That's it," Henry continued, never breaking eye contact with the massive animal bearing down on him. "I can see the pain in your eyes, son. Someone's been hurting you, haven't they? Making you angry when all you want is to be left in peace." 20 yards, 15, 10. Marcus found himself holding his breath, unable to look away from what he was certain would be Henry Peterson's final moments. Part of him wanted to call out a warning, to abandon his plan and try to save the old man's life. But shock had frozen him in place. At 5 yards, Destroyer suddenly planted his front hooves and skidded to a stop, sending a spray of dirt and grass into the air. The bull stood there, massive chest heaving, staring directly into Henry's weathered face with an expression that could only be described as confusion. "There you are," Henry said softly, slowly extending his free hand toward the bull's nose. "I thought so. You're not a killer, are you? You're just a victim, like me." What happened next would be talked about for decades in farming communities across Nebraska and beyond. Destroyer, the bull that had injured 3 men and killed 2 other animals, lowered his enormous head and allowed Henry Peterson to gently touch his muzzle. The moment Henry's weathered fingers made contact with the bull's nose, something shifted in both of them. Henry could feel the trembling in the massive animal's body, not from aggression, but from exhaustion and confusion. Destroyer, for his part, experienced something he hadn't felt since he was a calf: human kindness, without pain or fear. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Henry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. treated like a weapon instead of a living creature. But that stops today. Marcus Blackwood felt his legs give out beneath him, and he sank to his knees in the tall grass where he'd been hiding. His foolproof plan to eliminate Henry Peterson had not only failed spectacularly, but it had revealed something about the old man that made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about strength and power. Henry continued to stroke Destroyer's massive head while speaking in soothing tones. My granddaughter Sarah is studying to be a veterinarian, you know. She's taught me to recognize the signs of an abused animal, those scars on your hide, the way you flinch when you hear loud voices. Someone's been using you as a fighting machine. The bull's eyes, which had been red with rage just moments before, began to clear. He made a low rumbling sound deep in his chest, not a growl or a threat, but something almost like a purr. From his hidden position, Jake Morrison whispered into his radio, "Boss, what do you want us to do?" "The plan is completely blown." Marcus couldn't answer. He was transfixed by the scene unfolding before him. An 80-year-old man and a killer bull standing together in perfect harmony beneath an old oak tree, like something out of a biblical parable. "You know what?" Henry said to Destroyer, still recording everything on his phone. "I think you need a new name. Destroyer is what someone called you when they wanted to use you as a weapon. How about we call you Gentle? It's what you really are underneath all that pain." The newly christened Gentle responded by taking a step closer to Henry and lowering his head even further, as if asking for more of the gentle contact he'd been denied for so long. Henry looked directly into his phone's camera and spoke words that would eventually be viewed by millions of people around the world. "This is what happens when you treat a living creature with respect instead of fear. Every animal, no matter how damaged, remembers what love feels like." Marcus Blackwood realized in that moment that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Not only had his plan failed, but Henry Peterson now had video evidence of a coincidental bull attack that was anything but coincidental. Worse yet, he had revealed something about himself that made him look like a monster compared to the gentle old man he'd tried to murder. Have you ever witnessed a moment when kindness transformed a dangerous situation? Do you believe that all aggression stems from pain and fear? Share your thoughts about the power of compassion in the comments. Word of Henry Peterson's extraordinary encounter with the bull spread through the farming community faster than wildfire. Within hours, Henry's granddaughter Sarah had uploaded the video to social media, where it was shared thousands of times by people amazed at the old man's courage and the bull's transformation. But the video revealed more than just an incredible human-animal connection. Sarah, who was studying agricultural law as part of her veterinary program, immediately recognized the suspicious circumstances surrounding the accident. The timing, the convenient fence failure, the bull's apparent training to attack on command, all of it pointed to a deliberate attempt on her grandfather's life. "Grandpa," Sarah said as they sat in the farmhouse kitchen that evening, "this wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill you today." Henry nodded gravely. At 80, he had seen enough of the world to recognize evil when it presented itself. "I know, sweetheart. The question is, what do we do about it?" Their answer came in the form of Detective Maria Santos from the Nebraska State Police, who arrived at the farm the next morning after receiving an anonymous tip about the video. Detective Santos had grown up on a farm herself and immediately understood the implications of what she was seeing. "Mr. Peterson," she said after reviewing the footage multiple times, "I need you to walk me through everything that happened yesterday, and I mean everything." Henry told her about Marcus Blackwood's years-long campaign of harassment, the systematic destruction of his business relationships, and the increasingly desperate tactics used to force him off his land. He showed her the documentation he had kept of every incident, every threat, every coincidental problem that had befallen his farm since refusing to sell. "This man has been trying to destroy my life for 3 years, Henry concluded. Yesterday was just the first time he tried to end it. Detective Santos launched a full investigation into Marcus Blackwood's activities, and what she discovered shocked even her seasoned police sensibilities. The damaged fence had indeed been deliberately weakened. The bull's aggressive behavior was the result of systematic abuse and conditioning. Most damning of all, Marcus's own security cameras had captured him and his men implementing their plan. When Detective Santos arrived at the Blackwood mansion with a warrant, She found Marcus in his study, staring out the window at the property he had built through decades of ruthless business practices. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. "Marcus Blackwood," Detective Sanos announced, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, animal abuse, and about a dozen other charges we're still calculating." Marcus didn't resist. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood: genuine remorse. Seeing Henry Peterson's kindness toward the bull Marcus had tortured and weaponized had awakened something in him that he thought had died long ago. "Detective," Marcus said quietly as he was led toward the police car, "I want to make a full confession, and I want to make things right." The trial of Marcus Blackwood became a sensation throughout Nebraska and beyond. The video of Henry and Gentle, as the bull was now universally known, was played in courtrooms, shown on national news programs, and became a symbol of the triumph of kindness over cruelty. Marcus's confession was complete and devastating. He admitted to years of illegal harassment, revealed the details of other farmers he had driven off their land through similar tactics, and provided evidence that led to charges against several of his accomplices. The prosecution estimated that Marcus's criminal enterprise had destroyed over 30 family farms and caused millions of dollars in damage to rural communities. But the most powerful moment of the trial came when Henry Peterson took the stand. Instead of demanding maximum punishment for the man who had tried to kill him, Henry spoke about forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. "Your Honor," Henry said, addressing the judge directly, "Marcus Blackwood tried to murder me using an animal he had tortured into becoming a weapon. But standing here today, I can't help but think about that bull, about how quickly he remembered what kindness felt like when someone finally offered it to him." Henry turned to look directly at Marcus, who was sitting at the defendant's table with tears streaming down his face. "I believe there's a difference between justice and vengeance," Henry continued. "Justice means making sure this man can never hurt anyone else. But vengeance would mean forgetting that even the most damaged souls can sometimes remember what love feels like." The judge sentenced Marcus Blackwood to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and related charges. Additionally, Marcus was ordered to pay restitution to all the families he had wronged and to forfeit the majority of his agricultural empire to a fund supporting small family farms. But perhaps the most meaningful part of Marcus's punishment was also the most unexpected. As part of his plea agreement, he was required to spend one day each month for the rest of his sentence working at an animal sanctuary, caring for abused and neglected livestock. On his first day at the sanctuary, Marcus was assigned to help care for a massive bull who had been rescued from an illegal fighting operation. The bull was aggressive, traumatized, and dangerous, much like Gentle had been before meeting Henry Peterson. As Marcus approached the bull's pen, the animal charged the fence, snorting and pawing in fury. Marcus's first instinct was to back away, to maintain his distance from the dangerous creature. But then he remembered Henry's words about damaged souls and the possibility of redemption. "Easy there, big fellow," Marcus said softly, unconsciously echoing the words Henry had used. "I know you're scared and angry. So am I. It would take time, months of patient work. But eventually Marcus would learn what Henry Peterson had known all along: that kindness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds in both animals and humans." Do you believe that people like Marcus Blackwood can truly change? Or was Henry Peterson too generous in his forgiveness? Have you ever had to choose between justice and vengeance in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, the Peterson family farm had become something no one could have imagined, a symbol of hope and redemption that drew visitors from around the world. Henry Peterson, now 85 and moving a bit slower, but with his spirit as strong as ever, had transformed his modest 200-acre farm into the Gentle Hearts Animal Sanctuary. Named after the bull who had refused to be a weapon, the sanctuary housed dozens of rescued animals and served as a teaching center for humane agriculture practices. Gentle himself had become the sanctuary's most famous resident and unofficial ambassador. The massive bull, now calm and content, spent his days grazing peacefully in a spacious pasture where children from local schools would come to learn about animal behavior and the power of compassion. He seemed to particularly enjoy the attention from young visitors, as if he understood his role as a living example of transformation. "He's become quite the philosopher," Henry would joke to visitors as they watched Gentle interact gently with the children. "Sometimes I think he understands more about forgiveness than most humans do." Sarah Peterson had graduated from veterinary school and returned to help run the sanctuary while also completing her law degree. The young woman had discovered a passion for animal welfare law and had become a leading advocate for legislation protecting farm animals from abuse. She often spoke at conferences about her grandfather's encounter with Gentle, using their story to illustrate the connection between animal welfare and human character. "What my grandfather taught me that day," Sarah would tell audiences, "is that every act of cruelty diminishes us and every act of kindness elevates us. The choice between the two defines who we are as human beings." The most surprising development of all, however, involved Marcus Blackwood himself. After serving 3 years of his sentence, Marcus had been granted early parole for exceptional behavior and his unprecedented cooperation with authorities investigating agricultural crimes. His work at the animal sanctuary had genuinely transformed him from the inside out, teaching him lessons about humility and empathy that his billions of dollars never could. Upon his release, Marcus had done something that shocked everyone who knew his former character. He had asked Henry Peterson for permission to work at Gentle Heart Sanctuary as a volunteer. "I know you have every reason to hate me," Marcus had said when he showed up at Henry's door on a cold Tuesday morning, exactly 4 years after the day he had tried to have the old man killed. "But I've learned something about redemption in prison, and I need to ask if you might have room for one more damaged soul at your sanctuary." Henry had studied Marcus's face for a long moment, looking for signs of the ruthless businessman who had terrorized him for years. Instead, he saw something he recognized from his work with rescued animals: genuine remorse and a desperate desire to make amends. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Henry had said finally. "Even you. But you'll start at the bottom, cleaning stalls and feeding animals. And if you show even a hint of your old character, you're gone." Marcus had nodded eagerly. "I understand. And Mr. Peterson, thank you." Now, 2 years later, Marcus worked at the sanctuary 6 days a week, refusing any payment beyond room and board in a modest cottage on the property. He had become particularly skilled at working with the most traumatized animals, perhaps because he understood what it felt like to be transformed by unexpected kindness. His relationship with Gentle had become especially meaningful. The bull who had once been trained to kill him now sought out Marcus's company, often approaching the fence when he heard Marcus's voice. It was as if both of them understood that they were living proof that even the most damaged beings could choose a different path. "I spent my whole life believing that power came from making others fear me," Marcus reflected one evening as he and Henry sat on the farmhouse porch, watching Gentle graze in the sunset. "But watching you that day, seeing how you chose compassion over self-preservation, I realized I had been living as less than human." Henry rocked slowly in his chair, considering his words carefully. "The funny thing is, Marcus, I was never trying to be heroic that morning. I just saw a hurt animal and responded the way my heart told me to. Sometimes I think we make goodness more complicated than it needs to be." The Gentle Heart Sanctuary had inspired similar projects across the country. Sarah received calls weekly from people wanting to start their own sanctuaries or from farmers seeking advice on humane practices. The video of Henry and Gentle had been viewed over 50 million times and had become a touchstone for discussions about animal welfare, criminal justice reform, and the power of forgiveness. Henry's granddaughter had also used their story to create the Peterson Foundation, which provided grants to small farmers transitioning to humane and sustainable practices. One of their first major grants had gone to families whose farms had been destroyed by Marcus's illegal activities, helping them rebuild with better practices and stronger legal protections. On the 5th anniversary of what locals now call Gentle Tuesday, the sanctuary hosted a celebration that drew over 1,000 visitors. Henry gave a short speech, standing beside the oak tree where everything had changed, with Gentle grazing peacefully nearby. "5 years ago, someone tried to use an animal as a weapon against me," Henry said to the gathered crowd. "Today, that same animal helps us teach children about compassion, and the man who ordered the attack has become one of our most dedicated caregivers. I tell you this not to celebrate my own forgiveness, but to remind all of us that every single day we choose between fear and love, between cruelty and kindness. He paused, looking out over the crowd of faces, farmers and city dwellers, children and seniors, people who had come from across the country to see the place where a moment of grace had changed everything. Gentle taught me that morning that love is always stronger than hate, always more powerful than fear. And if an old farmer and an angry bull can choose transformation over destruction, then any of us can. The question isn't whether we're capable of change, it's whether we're brave enough to choose it. As the sun set over the Nebraska farmland, casting golden light across the sanctuary where former enemies had become allies, and a weapon had become a teacher, Henry Peterson smiled at the simple truth he had learned, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from helping them remember how to be human. Marcus Blackwood, standing at the edge of the crowd with tears in his eyes, understood that he had received the greatest gift possible. Not just forgiveness, but the chance to become the man he should have been all along. And Gentle, grazing peacefully in his pasture, had become living proof that even the most damaged hearts can learn to beat with love instead of anger. The story of Henry Peterson and Gentle had become more than just a tale of survival. It had become a testament to the transformative power of choosing compassion over vengeance, love over fear, and redemption over destruction. And in a world that often seemed to reward cruelty and aggression, their legacy offered something far more valuable: hope,